Jai Jinendra, everyone, and welcome to today's Jainism class. We're delighted to welcome back Dr. Mehool Sanghrajka for the next couple of weeks. Today's session, Dr. Mehool will be covering Samyag Darshan, what it is, and how real spiritual journeys start with Samyag Darshan. For those of you who don't know Mehool, he is an EdTech entrepreneur and managing trustee of the Institute of Jainology. He teaches the Jain faith in a practical style with everyday examples and making it easy to understand. Before we begin tonight's session, if you do have any questions for Dr. Mehool, please do raise your hands before asking it, or if you prefer, you can ask us directly in the chat. So without further ado, I will hand the class over to Dr. Mehool.
Thank you so much, Jai Jinendra, and a very warm welcome from me as well on this class on everything Samyag Darshan. Before I start, can I say again a big thank you to Ajitbhai and the team here who are doing a wonderful job. Delighted so many of you can join us this evening, and looking forward to having an entertaining discussion. So please don't hesitate to put your hand up, ask questions. The idea is not for me to get through my content, but for you to understand the subject. So many of us as Jains do many things that we do habitually and take for granted. And what I wanted to do was just investigate some of those as a starting point. So, for example, one of the prayers we learn is Kamemi Savva Jive. And in that, when we say Savva Jive, we mean all life. But what is that life? Is that just the people in your house, the people you like? Who is it that you are asking for forgiveness and forgiving? And one of the things that Jainism says, and I understand you've been doing Tatva, so you'll have probably learned this, is that everything that has consciousness of any type is life, which means that, the trees, the grass, the insects, the animals that you see are all life. And in that life lies one of the fundamental beliefs of Jainism, which is that life is basically an Atma, a soul, consciousness or energy or any of the other names that you want to give it. But there is a duality here. And by duality, I mean that that soul and that object or body that it is in are two separate things. One is physical matter. So this body of mine is made of particles and atoms and other physical things. But the soul that sits inside it is just consciousness. Okay, so this is a fundamental belief of Jainism. The other is when you think about the relationship between things that are living. So if you look at the tree in your garden and you think about yourself, is there a relationship there? And what Jainism says is that there is, in two ways. Firstly, that you and that tree have the same soul. So from that perspective, from that angle, from that point of view, you're identical, you're the same, which is why we try not to harm anything, because we're identical if you look at the perspective of the soul. However, if you think about it from the perspective of the body, we're also related, and that relationship is what we call reincarnation. So we've been that tree, and that tree has possibly been a human being. And so in that, there is, again, a relationship of sorts. So when you put those two things together, what you start to see is that life is something that is about this soul going from one place to another, being permanent, being, there in its the consciousness or the energy it provides the body, and the bodies differ depending upon something called karma. So when you put those three things together, this idea of soul, the idea of karma, and the idea of reincarnation, that is in essence the Jain religion. And what Jainism tries to do and preaches largely around is, how do you get out of this? Because whilst you're in this cycle, you will always be stuck in this cycle. You're going from one to the other, one to the other. And that cycle is seen as a cycle of suffering, because even though you might think that, you have a good life, you will see a lot of suffering through that life as well. So if you want to end that suffering, end that cycle, end that birth and death, end the idea of, going from place to place, then you have to break out of that by liberating your soul. So today we're going to discuss this idea of what that liberation means. But when you think about that soul again, one of the things that you need to think about closely is your soul linked to other souls, or is your soul your own? So for example, if you are in a family, and in your next birth, you take life as a tree, we'll stick to the tree example, will everybody in your family also become trees? And if not, then is your relationship to them built around this life rather than built around every life that you lead? Okay, so this is something to think about. The second is that in this soul, what is the difference between the soul and the body? And why do we look at the soul as a fundamental source of belief? Well, when you think about this idea of soul, it's permanent. It doesn't change. It basically stays as it is through its whole life. Whereas when you think about this body might last for 100 years. So before 100 years, this body wasn't there, and after 100 years, it won't be there. And even through the process of 100 years, it changes and, ages and so on. So when you have those two things, you can see that some things are absolute and some things are relative. And so when we think about the soul as, that's what the word really means. It's absolute. It cannot be changed. If I think of my body, there are parts of my body that are absolute. For example, the atom. But the body itself is not absolute, and it will die someday, and it'll go back into being atoms or whatever it was. And so in that reality, we need to start thinking about what is it that takes us out of this cycle. Because if the cycle is inherently putting us through this whole angle of birth, death, suffering, there must be a way out of that. And that is the process that I'd like to talk a little bit about. So let's think about the idea of belief first. Because to achieve liberation, we must have belief. If you want to be Christian, very difficult to do if you don't believe in Christ. And if so, in our case, belief means essentially that we believe in the teachings of Bhagwan Mahavir, which essentially talk about us being this fundamental soul. So the beliefs are supernatural. By that I mean that they are things that are beyond our senses. And so there is no proof, if you think about proof in the scientific way, of these things, but they're due to our faith, our upbringing, and our beliefs. So, for example, the idea of soul, the idea of karma, the idea of reincarnation. All of these tell you about a journey of some energy that is going from one body to another, but there is no real proof of it. It's the belief that we hold. Okay. Now, if you think about that belief, what does it tell us? It tells us that the soul basically has, properties of energy and bliss. And you see that, when you see somebody pass away, when you look at their body, when the soul has got left and it's gone, it fundamentally changes. And you see, everything stops working, moving, etc., etc. So effectively, the power source has gone, and this power source is the soul that sits in there. The soul itself is fundamentally bliss. It is contented, happy, in this state. But it's got two issues currently. The first is that it's trapped in this body. And secondly, the body is basically living through its senses. The five senses and the mind that you have. Now, the senses usually have a number of other issues that they bring. Firstly, they're limited. I normally wear glasses. So if I'm wearing glasses, that means my eyesight isn't perfect. Now, in addition to that, I'm slightly absent-minded, which means that I'm not paying attention. That means I miss other things. I might also, like most kids do these days, have my headphones on, so my attention is away. Now, when you think about that scenario, you can already see I'm probably missing everything in front of me. And that's the reality we live in, an imperfect set of senses that basically is trapped with a mind that filters everything through a lens of its experience and everything it's heard and learned and so on. And it's all powered by this soul that's all powerful and completely blissed out. And so in that scenario, you have to sometimes wonder what it is that the soul is doing in there. Why do we need it? And the reality is that that is who we actually are. And by that, I mean, there are very specific things that the soul does that actually makes us completely reliant on it. The first is that everything that you do, it is the soul that is the doer. Think about that. That everything you do, it is the soul that is the doer, which means that the consequence of all of that, whether it's karma, whether it's something else, is yours to enjoy or suffer because you have done it. Now, in that, let's add a bit of time. So it might be you did this in your last life and you're suffering or enjoying the fruits in this life. when you have no knowledge of what the last life was. So again, something that is very critical to understand, that as soon as you start to realize that everything that happens to you from a karmic perspective is either there because you have at some point done it and it is giving you the results, or you're putting the effort into doing it now and therefore are seeing some sort of consequence. So if you are the doer of everything, then it also follows that you are the receiver of the karma that comes because you have done this. And that is effectively what the soul is carrying with it. So at the end of this life, when you move to the next one, the whole determination of what your next life looks like, your family, your birth, your experiences, is all from the karma that you have collected. Okay? And it is this collection of karma that keeps you within the cycle. So from the soul's perspective, it would probably like to break free and get out of this. But from the karma's perspective, the longer it can keep you in this state of thinking you're this body and this person, and my name is Mehool and I live in Stanmore and I do this, etc., that basically ties me back to this body, to a point where all I'm doing is binding karmas related to this body. And as a result, all I'm doing is essentially keeping that cycle running. Now, in that, I also mentioned the word effort. Effort we call purushat in technical terminology. Effort is interesting because effort is effectively the free will that you have. When you think about, what is there in terms of things, a lot of people think everything is destined and fated, and we'll talk about that next week. But in all of this, you actually have free will. And your will, you might say, well, I'm not able to do anything, but you don't have to. Because in Jainism, whether you're thinking of something, whether you're saying it, or whether you're doing it, they're all the same. And they all have the same karma. So think about that. You don't have to kill anybody. You just have to think about killing them, and it's the same effect. Now, in that reality of your free will, the consequence of your free will is that it binds karma. And that karma is effectively what is keeping you in the cycle. So what does that cycle look like? Well, you could take birth as a human being, and we consider this to be the highest birth, even higher than heavenly birth, because it is in this life that you have the ability to discriminate in terms of right and wrong. You have a body with which you can actually make effort and do things that can progress you along your spiritual path. Okay? So we all have this ability, but why don't we use it? We'll come to that in a second. So apart from human, you have animals and plants, subhuman type of life. You have heavenly beings. So if humans are superior, why do you need heaven? Well, if you keep doing good things, you have to go somewhere where you can enjoy the benefit of good things, and that's called heaven. And similarly, if you keep doing bad things, you have to go somewhere where you have to enjoy the benefits of doing bad things, and that's called hell. So for us, heaven and hell aren't destinations. They're places you go to either enjoy your beach holiday or serve your prison sentence before you come back to other forms of life. But they're important in the sense that it works in terms of the karma theory, that you're actually able to see the benefits and the consequences of your actions, whether that's in heaven or in hell. And as I said, human birth, which is where we are, is the most important. In this birth, the problems we deal with are really twofold. One is that we are totally dependent on our senses and mind. And when you think about your day-to-day life, even a simple thing like eating food, you tend to use a lot of your senses just to eat food. You know, the look of it, the smell of it, the taste, the texture, you know, the heat. All of these things are things that we pay attention to when all we're doing is nourishing the body. And the same with everything else. So we become totally dependent on these senses. And we become dependent to the point where we tend to believe everything we see and hear, even though I've explained to you that the senses that you have are not perfect. And the mind that you have is filled with the experiences you've had, others have had, that you've heard about. As humans, we have this great ability of picking up experiences without actually suffering them. You know, we read books about places and now we've got an experience of what that's going to be like. Or a friend of ours goes somewhere and says, you know, I went to this place and it was the most beautiful. And now you have an experience of what that's going to look like, and you probably want to do it. So we pick up all of this information and that becomes a filter for everything we see. If every time, when I grew up in Nairobi, everybody who had a dog had them for protection reasons. And when I came here for many years, every time I saw a dog, I was scared because, you know, they were fierce. Now that's nothing but my mind conditioning me to what I'm seeing and saying, ah, dog, be scared, get out of the way, as opposed to saying, dog, that looks cute, go and give it a pat. So this conditioning is what we live in. And what this conditioning does for us is that it basically keeps us living as if we are this body. And in that process, we carry on binding the karma. We have, you know, work, friends, relationships, all these other things with which we then have thoughts, you know, fights, happy moments, whatever. Think of every one of those having a consequence of a karma. And then think about that karma as something you have to then get rid of some other life. Okay? So that is essentially the cycle. Now, where do we understand all of this from? And the answer is that there are many souls, infinite numbers, that have already achieved liberation. So for us, the last significant one is Bhagwan Mahavir. Even though there were some after him, he is the one that taught us the process of liberation, and that's why we call him a Tirthankar, the person who showed us how to cross this Tirth and basically you know, get liberated. So souls can be liberated souls like his, or worldly souls like ours. And for us, the thing that we see, and many of you will have seen around Jainism, is that it's very focused on this idea of breaking this cycle. And the reason is that this is the way to achieve liberation. So what's the first step in breaking this cycle? And we call the first step Samyag Darshan. Samyag Darshan, loosely translated, can mean that your darshan, your perception, your viewpoint is correct. It could mean you have an enlightened viewpoint of what the world around you looks like, or it could mean that it's the right faith that you now have. There's no straight translation, so there are many ways that it's been translated. And what it is a very simple concept. And that concept is that you have experienced your soul. That's it. That's what Samyak Darshan really means. So that experience of the soul could be either because you've actually physically experienced it, you felt it within you, you know, had that experiential moment, or it could mean that you've through your religious and other practices, your reading, your listening to lectures, etc., developed a really, really strong belief in it. And so your actions are the same as if you had experienced it. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So that is effectively the whole idea of Samyak Darshan. Now, you know, if that is all it is, why don't we all have it? And the answer is a really simple one. but nobody gave us a formula to get it. So I can't tell you do X, Y, and Z, and then tomorrow you'll be fine and everything will look rosy. What the reason for that? There's a very good reason for that. Is because all of us come with very different burdens, very different loads of karma. So we don't know whether, on a scale of 1 to 10, we're at 1 or we're at 8. We have no idea. And so the idea of removing or getting rid of something when you have no idea of what it is and how much it is actually the problem in itself. And so what Jains have always prescribed is the idea of trying to suppress your karma, at least to a point where you experience your soul. Right? So how do you do that? If you have a lot of karma that is sitting around you, preventing you from experiencing your soul, putting lots of good karma on top of it, and I'm simplifying this, but putting lots of good karma on top of it will get to a point where you have enough good karma to suppress the bad karma. And that suppression, a bit like, sitting in rainy London today, if you sit there, sometimes you see between the clouds, there's a little chink and the ray of sunlight comes through. What does that tell you? It tells you the sun is always there. It hasn't gone anywhere. The clouds are stopping us experiencing it. So it's the same thing. The soul is always there. The karma is stopping you experiencing it. But if you can put enough good karma on this, the karma that is around your soul, you will cause that little chink where you will experience everything, the energy of the soul that is inside of you. And so to do that, we do all the religious and other things, Paryushan, Pratikaman, Puja, Arti, Swadhyay, Stavans, etc., Ambel. All of these things are there to build this sort of karma. And that's why this religious activity is actually very good, because it helps in achieving that. Once you achieve it, what does it actually do? Well, the first line of a book called the Tattva Sutra, which some of you might have seen or read or looked at, says Samyag Darshan Nan Charitrani Moksh Margaha. So Samyag Darshan, Samyag Nan, right knowledge, and Samyag Charitra, right conduct, is the path to achieving moksha. The reason Samyak Darshan is there first is that once you achieve that, everything else becomes Samyak. So let me explain. If today I'm talking about the soul and you start to build this picture of what it is, however much I tell you, at some point when you experience your soul, my explanation will be meaningless. Your knowledge will be actually experiential. It'll be, very different. It's the same as if I sit here and tell you about, going skiing in the mountains, and I can tell you lots and lots about it. The day you actually go and do it, everything will change, because now you have experience, not just, other people's thoughts, other people's words, and, some beliefs. You actually have true experience. And it's the same for conduct, that your conduct actually completely changes, because now you understand that this body is something that you have, not as the life that you've always thought it was, but something that is there for you to experience the karma that you have bound. Just think about that. It's very profound, that this body is not here to give you the life you think you have. It is here for your soul to experience the karma it has bound. And so everything that you experience is what you have bound, either previously in this life or other lives. And today, if you're sitting here learning this, or sharing this webinar, it's because your karma is at a level that allows you to do that. There are thousands of Jains in London. Why aren't they all here? And this is what you have to realize, that it is essentially that. So once you realize that, what happens to you? Normally, people who actually experience proper long-term Samyag Darshan end up taking Diksha, right? Now, let's just think about how different or how radically different that life is to this life. So in this life, you're attached to everything around your identity. You know, my name, my family name, my work, my occupation, where I've come from, where I live. We put all these labels on us. You take Diksha, you're a nomad. You walk from place to place, you have no identity. Often you even change your name, right? You give up everything you've held so dearly all this time, and you just give it up and you become without that. Secondly, you know, we all, either as a hobby or for a living, collect possessions, houses, cars, things inside, etc., clothes, you know, beauty products. When you become a monk, you end up with 2 pieces of cotton cloth. That's it. You've given up everything that you spent your whole life accumulating overnight. Just to think about how radical this is, to give you an idea about how radical getting Samyak Darshan is. The third thing is, you know, when you're in this life, somebody says something to you, it becomes a question of ego. How dare they, you know, who do they think they are? Do they know who I am, etc.? But imagine when you take Diksha, you have to put your hands together and go to people and say, give me some food. Where is space for ego in this? You know, it completely kills that idea. And the last thing is that, you know, we live in this life of fear. Our kids go out, you know, text me when you're about to come home, text me if you're on the train, call me if there's a problem, I can pick you up at the station. Here you're walking place to place, no mobile phone, no credit card. Whatever comes, comes. You don't even know if your meal is coming. So you can see how everything we cherish because of this body becomes meaningless as soon as we discover our souls. And once we discover our souls, we realize the purpose of this body. And the transformation is so radical, that it basically, you know, makes you wonder what you were doing before in this, you know, human life compared to what there is. So what is it? What is it that you are trying to achieve with this? Well, think about this from a logical perspective. You know, let's forget the technicalities. But you are now this soul that has taken this path of Diksha. And in this path of Diksha, you have experienced the soul within you and realized A, what the body is, and B, the karma that you have. So logically, you have to stop new karma coming because you don't want to put more burden. How do you do that? By perfecting your conduct. So what does that mean? It means that you cause no harm at all through your thoughts, your words, your deeds. So you'll have seen, you know, pictures of monks having little brooms, for example. Before they sit down, they sweep where they're going to sit, so they don't harm even the smallest insect. They're very careful where they walk. They don't walk on grass or other things that are living as long as they can help it. They, you know, when they walk on a path, they look 3 feet ahead of them to make sure there are no insects and so on. So you perfect your conduct, and this takes years, to the point where everything you do is so controlled, so disciplined, and done with complete awareness that you don't bind any more karma. Okay, that's number one. And then number two is, and you do that over time because you have to learn how to do it, not just in terms of your actions, but even in terms of your thoughts. As I said, they're equal. They bind equal karma. So this will take many, many years. And just think about that from another perspective, that Bhagwan Mahavir in his life, even though, you know, he was going to become a Tirthankar, Diksha took him 12 years to go from starting to actually achieving his enlightenment. 12 years. very long time and in very difficult circumstances because life was much different then as it is now. So once you do that, that conduct, and in the Jain faith, conduct is actually seen as supreme. It's the thing that we focus on. So think about conduct from this perspective. That when you're doing, for example, things like pratikam, when you do kausag, you sit in meditation, keep the body still, try and you know negate it. When you're doing ambel, when you're doing upwas, you're trying to control the food that you take in. So all of these things around the body, the conduct of the body, are essential in terms of us trying to control, the whole idea of karma. So once you've perfected your conduct, what happens? What happens next? You then lead a life of penance, right? Why do you lead a life of penance? Because penance is the way, once you've reached that state, you have the right vow, the right intention of burning quickly the karma that you already have. Okay, so you stop the karma coming in, you know you have some already there, and you start a process of burning that. And that may take more than one life. But that whole process is the process of Diksha. And you see, most people who do Diksha will, always be, even Samniji, who you may have seen here, fast regularly, do all sorts of other penances regularly. The idea of this penance is to, burn the karma and, purify the body. Because once you burn the karma, your soul becomes lighter. And you keep doing that. Again, we have no idea how much karma you have, but whatever it is, it will happen. And when that happens, you get to a point where if you are able to get rid of all the karma that affects your soul, then your soul is free. And by free, I mean it doesn't have anything, because don't forget what I said, your body is here for you to experience the karma that you have bound. But if you haven't bound any karma, you're free. You don't need a body to experience it because there's nothing to experience. So your soul becomes free. And what that means is that at the end of this life, when this body dies, that soul then gets liberated. So for us, we have three stages. You have the worldly soul, which is in a body. We have Samyag Darshan, which is enlightenment. You then get to a point where you are free. You've burnt all your karma. We call that Keval Gnan, because your soul is full of knowledge. And so once you remove the karma around it, that knowledge becomes, eternal. And so we call it Keval Gnan. And then once the body dies, we call it moksha, and you become liberated. So this is that path. But the thing that is interesting around this path is really a couple of things. Firstly, we start from a point of belief that today we haven't seen our souls, we can't see karma, we don't know anything about reincarnation because we can't remember our last life and all the life before. So all of these things are abstract ideas. And they're supernatural ideas. They're beyond our senses. We'll never see them, never hear them, never smell them, never touch them, taste them. And so we start with that belief, right? Number one. Number two, we need that belief to get to a point where we actually start not just believing it, but living that life. And over a period of time, turning all of that effort that we're using for that belief, whether it's learning or prayer or meditation or whatever it is, to actually get us to a point where we experience that soul. So that's quite a long, tough ask, and that's effectively the position we're in. Whilst we're doing that, don't forget, your body, your mind, and your senses are going to do everything they can, in my case, to convince me I'm Mehool. And so, you know, You've got family, you've got friends, you've got a job, you've got all of, and you live in this the whole day. So you're kind of in that belief system that this is who I am. So on the one hand, you're trying to believe something that you have never experienced or seen or is supernatural. And on the other, you live in this thing that keeps reinforcing that belief. And when you put those two things together, you can see how difficult it is to break out of prison. Okay? The second thing that you have to think about with this is that when you think about other religions, so think about Hinduism, okay? When you think about Hinduism and you think about Krishna Bhagwan, Ram Bhagwan, etc., it's not the same as saying that you are the soul. It's your responsibility because you are the doer, and you have to realize yourself to break out. That's a very different position to saying he's up there, he's made you, and if you pray to him, he'll give you give you heaven in your next birth. It's a very different ask. And in that, for us, because we live in hierarchies, we have ancestors and mothers and grandfathers, we have bosses, we have all sorts of things. So adding somebody else to a hierarchy, saying this person's on top of you, and with his grace, everything will happen, just pray to him, is far easier than saying realize your own soul through your own effort, and if you get there with the right belief, you'll achieve something. So this is the second big issue. The third big issue is this, that we have to understand that we are in a period, this cycle that we have, the time cycle. So we're in a time cycle period which after Bhagwan Mahavir, very shortly after him, a few decades, changed. And in that change, we got into a place, the fifth era, where liberation is not possible. Okay? So we might look at that and say, well, it's not possible, but the next birth it will be. Or you could actually look at that from another perspective and say, if there are several places that are Earths, we're born here because we're still in a place where we have a longer way to go. As I said, when you go to heaven, you're there because you have to enjoy the benefits of heaven. If you're here, it's because the karma that you have has brought you here because you're not in a place where liberation is possible. So the challenge is to move from here to somewhere else that's in the right time cycle. And we always talk about Simandar Swami and where he is. Once you get there, you then have to go through the process. Once you get through the process, you become liberated. Now, that is typically 3 lives. This one, the next one in heaven, the third one there. Okay? And that's the question I'm going to stop on. I'm sure there are questions. Is when you look around you and see everything that you have, both physical and material, friends, family, all your things, how easy is it to look at that and say, I'm going to give this up for 3 lives because I'm getting liberated? And that is the question of religion. If you are not Jain, and I'm not converting anybody here, but if you are not Jain and you are Hindu, then it doesn't become as difficult because the person that you are praying to can, in Hindu faith, do everything for you and give you everything. So you can go there and say, please, my daughter studied really hard, make sure she passes her GCSEs, and I'm due for a promotion, please make sure I get it. That's allowed. Not in Jainism. So if there are questions, I'm happy to stop. I'm sure there must be.
If anyone does have any questions, please can you raise your hand and you can unmute yourself and ask it, or you can put it in the chat. But while we're waiting for questions, I have one.
Please.
In previous lessons, we've been told that you can only reach moksha as a human.
Yes.
Now, you just said that you can be liberated in different earths
As a human.
as a human. So
We believe that there are many places like this, right? So if you look at the nearest one to us, and it's interesting. Before I go, I'll tell you that I went to a lecture by, I forget his name now, that physicist who's got really boyish looks. Oh, his name will come to me, and he basically was saying with the new James Webb Telescope, they now believe that there are 2 billion planets like Earth where life is possible.
okay.
We've always believed that. And the one that we look at is Mahavidya Kshetra, which is the closest. We believe that you achieve human birth on that planet. The difference being that it's in the 4th cycle, which means that Tirthankar's there and therefore liberation is possible. And the reason for this is that, you know, the process I've spoken about of cleansing and purifying, A, requires effort, and B, requires discrimination of right and wrong and so on. Those two things are only readily available in human form. If you're an animal, you're spending all day fearing whether, you know, the lion is going to eat you, whether you're going to find food, whether you're going to, you know, breed and create more animals, etc. If you're a tree, you're stuck, and, you know, heaven and hell, you're just enjoying or suffering, whichever it is. Human life is where it's possible. And the reason also to think about that is that when you see people, it is possible for people to be good or bad, and this is what I mean by discrimination, regardless of their condition. So you will see poor people who will get one piece of bread, split it in two, and share it with the guy next door. And you will see rich people who will go to, you know, spend £100 in a restaurant, but won't give 50p to the guy sitting outside. So your condition doesn't determine the outcome. This is this idea of discrimination.
Thank you.
If there's nobody else, you can carry on asking.
I don't know if anyone has. No one's put anything in the chat to me. I don't know if Darshan and Kavit, if you've received any questions.
That means either they've understood everything or I've lost them completely.
I haven't received any questions.
Sorry, I have a question, but I can't raise the hand. Sorry.
Okay.
That's
Is that okay?
Yes.
That's fine.
Okay, I want to ask you something. Are the old 24 Tirthakars born in the Earth planet, or they are different planet as well?
No, so we believe, and these are you know, beliefs rather than proofs, if you like, because when you look at the age gap and, you know, and the time difference and so on, we don't necessarily have physical proof. But this 24 Tirthankars are of this earth.
Okay.
And we when we look at, you know, when you recite Pratikaman, you'll see that there is another 24 coming on this earth. There is another 20, I believe, on Mahavidya Kshetra. So they have their own cycle. So yes, they're all on here. Now, the interesting thing about them is that it's not that they all follow the same, you know, the same learning, the same religion. Although they follow the religion of liberation, which has always been the way of Jainism, what they tend to do is put that within the environment they find it in and teach it within that environment. So during Parshvanath's time, for example, it's believed that the people were simpler, they had more ability to do penance, that they were more straightforward. And so he created a structure that wasn't as rigid as Bhagwan Mahavir's. By the time we got to Bhagwan Mahavir's, it was almost the end of the 4th cycle, and people had become, you know, less straightforward and less simpler and so on. So he had to be more stricter in his rules to keep them, you know, on the same path. So they develop a path depending upon the environment they're in. So the end is always the same, but the means might be slightly different.
Okay, because I was just wondering, Adinath was born, I don't have the count now, so many years ago, and that time the Earth planet was remote. There was
Well,
not many human people around.
absolutely. And if you look at what we know about him, he was teaching them, things like agriculture and other things. So you're right. I mean, he was in fact, even if you look at the timings of Parshvanath Bhagwan, I mean, the problem sometimes we have with this is that when you look at the accepted timings, and then you look at the archaeology and it's very
Yeah.
difficult to align them, right? So I always believe in one thing, which is you only need one Mahavir Bhagwan to believe in this
Yes.
religion to get to that place,
No,
right?
no, that's true.
And the other thing also, when you think about that, is if I asked you, what you had for lunch 2 weeks ago, you can't remember that, right? It's very difficult. When people weren't writing things down, remembering
Yes.
things hundreds of years ago, it's you have to take some of it with a pinch of salt.
Okay. Thank you.
I've just got one comment from Janki, and she just says, just thank you for a lovely session, and there's a lot to think about. So thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Mehool Bhai?
If not, can I be a bit cheeky and make a plug?
Go for it.
If you look at the participant list, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, there is a Professor Marie-Hélène Goris on the participant list.
Yeah.
So Marie-Hélène is the new Bhagwan Dharmanath Professor of Jainism at Birmingham University. There she is. And also an expert Sanskrit scholar. And the reason I mention it is this, that even though classes like this are extremely, extremely beneficial, I can tell you from my own experience that if you really want to learn this, and especially if you're retired, because now you have time, enroll in a class, in a master's class or something else, and learn it in a proper structured way. Because it's a tough religion in terms of understanding concepts, understanding, I mean, if this lecture was given using all the technical terms, you get lost very quickly because these aren't words we use every day. And, Marie-Hélène and the other two Jain professors that are now in Birmingham doing an amazing job of not only teaching Jainism, but teaching applied Jainism. How does it apply to the environment, to sustainability, to animal rights, all those things that are traditionally Jain, I would argue, but we've kind of given up. And, thank God somebody's bringing them back into the Jain fold. So, yeah, absolutely. If you can, I would highly recommend it, because when you learn these things from an academic perspective, the one thing that you get that you don't get in lectures like this is a historical perspective, right? And by that I mean, and the question on, for example, Adinath Bhagwan, what happens is that over time, as other religions develop ideas, there has to be an answer. So that becomes a Jain idea, right? As other religions start to follow certain things. And so you see, religion actually isn't all started 100%. It starts with what one person said, and as time develops, and it develops because we've moved country, we've moved language, we've changed our habits. So it has to adapt. And as it adapts, it evolves and changes. And this is what you learn from an academic perspective, how time influences this. So, yeah, I would highly recommend it. And if you want to ask Marie-Hélène any questions, she's here. Please go and ask.
Thank you, Mehool Bhai. I think no, we don't have a question. But Mary-Ellen, what is the is the subject exactly that you're teaching? Is there many subjects?
Oh yeah. So first of all, yeah, thank you so much, Mehool, for this introduction, and thank you very much for your lecture. It was fascinating. You always have this very sharp and clear way to explain the concepts and how they are applied. Yeah, so I did my PhD many years ago on Anekantavad, especially in Prabhachandra's Pramaya Kamaramartanda, and now I'm teaching Jainism, as you said, on many different topics. So introductions to Jainism, but also, as Mehool said, a more applied Jainism. Yeah, there are a lot of topics. What can yeah. My students are mainly students in theology and religion, you know. So I'm also introducing to them some other traditions from South Asia, and yeah, from an historical perspective and philosophical perspective, and what does it mean concretely for the contemporary society. So, and gender issues also, and ecology especially. So all that you can imagine is are important questions for the students today. Yeah.
I think one way to think about this is if we had a Jain class, you would get a few dedicated people, but that would be it. So the approach here, which I think is ingenious, is to put Jainism into every other class. So if you're doing environmental studies, there's a module on Jainism. If you're doing gender studies, there's a module on Jainism. So suddenly you have all these people who've probably never heard of this or never considered it, now know about it, and then will come and do either dissertations or classes or whatever. And this way you get
Everywhere.
to you get to a wide range of people. So absolutely. So it's in so many different things, but it's wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot to mention also a module on yoga and meditation, which is highly popular. I should have started with this as well.
I don't think anyone else has got any questions. But thank you, Mary-Ellen, for your summary of your what you're teaching. Well, I think it's now 9 o'clock.
So yeah, we can all go and see Rishi Sunak
We can,
debate with
yeah.
Keir Starmer. That's at 9 o'clock. But before we do that, I just wanted to say that my plan for next time was to talk a little bit about fate, karma, and destiny. Because we often believe that, you know, we're experiencing bad luck and, you know, all these things are happening to us. And so what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about how you get through life and what all of that means. And also give you a formula of how you craft your own destiny. If by then you think there are, you know, people have thought of questions, and maybe we can start with questions in the, you know, at the beginning and then do that.
That's great. And that's a really fascinating topic as well for next week. A lot of, there's always the question of why me?
Yes.
So yeah.
And why did the same things happen to the same people again and again?
Exactly. So that's great. If anyone does have any questions that they think about over the next week or so, and you'd like to ask it to Mehool Bhai, you can ask those questions next week.
There is a question I've just seen.
You've received a question? Yeah.
In the chat. Can you talk about dairy? Aha. A divisive question. Okay. So let me say a few words about dairy. I'm going to start with a confession. I'm vegan, but I have been for about 9 years. But in the Jain religion, the idea of drinking milk has been there for a long time, centuries, and it's always been as a natural process. But I think, you know, from my understanding and the way I apply this, is that I don't see that there is anything wrong with the product. milk. Okay. And if you think about what the old days really meant, I mean, if any of you have ever lived in a proper, a proper village, by proper, I mean, cow dung used to make streets and, some houses and all of that sort of thing. The idea of in those places is always that the people know the cow from which the milk comes, right? The cow lives with them. And typically, and this is what is supposed to happen, the milk that is left is the excess milk that is there after the calf has had the milk, right? And the milk itself, largely, I mean, they bring the cow to your house, you give them a sufferyu, they fill it up, you heat it, and that's what it is. It's the actual stuff. Today we have 4 issues. The first is that because of demand and supply, there is, this idea of industrialization. Okay. So there is this idea of industrialization, which means you've got to factory farm the animals in large numbers to produce large amounts. The second thing is that the product itself is no longer the same because they put steroids and hormones and, diluted and so on. So you're actually, there's a concoction there, which in my case was, affecting me health-wise. And when I stopped, that all of it stopped, which is why I carried on with it. The third is that to maximize production, they have to separate the calf and the cow. Again, another issue. And the fourth problem is that because these animals are now seen as milk producers, as soon as they stop producing milk, they, move them to beef. Whereas in India, you see that, goshalas and all these places where people, so to me, it's not the product, it's the process. And, when I go to India, in these places, I have no issues. I mean, you can't eat without ghee and everything, but I don't see it as a problem because, there is no ethical issue in the production. And so, to me, that's the issue rather than the idea that the product is bad. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah, to me it does. I'm sure it makes sense to a lot of other people as well.
And you see, for example, people like the the Hare Krishna temple sells ahimsa milk on those bases. The problem is they can't do mass production because by its own nature, you're creating milk as a byproduct, and therefore you can't actually create the volume. I can see another hand up as well.
Ashwin Bhai's got his hand up. Ashwin Bhai?
Oh, I don't agree with Mr. Mehool Bhai because, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Because whether it's India, they've got the same problems. All these places, they've got so many things they do with the milk. They've got goshalas, but even in the goshalas, the cows are sometimes separated. They don't have, they're just for hen's sake.
So
It's the same issues
I
that are happening here are happening there.
I agree with you 100% for the same reason. I'm talking about, when you go to a complete gamra where, the cows are actually living with the people. And if you look at that, what that shows you is what it used to be like when
but
people
that is
were
a
saying,
rarity.
when people were saying, yes, we should drink milk, because it was like that. But you're right, India is changing as well for the same reason, that they want to produce
India
volume.
is the biggest exporter of beef.
Yes.
So where does it all come from?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So by consuming this, we are doing ahimsa as I notice it.
Yes.
So
and that's why it's changed, in my view. That it's gone from being something that was occasionally had as a byproduct to something that, every Starbucks on every corner now needs, and therefore is produced in mass, and all the problems in himsa that go with it. So yes. So
the other problem that I notice is that the milk is for the baby calf.
Yes.
So all the hormones, everything that it is for the calf to grow to full size within a year. So by us consuming that product, we are doing harm to our body because we can't really grow that big in 1 year.
You're absolutely right, except the problem today is to increase the production. They give the cow, artificial hormones and steroids, which ends up in the milk as well. So you now have even more, not just the natural ones, but the artificial ones. And therefore that's where I see the problem as well. And you're right, it does all sorts of things to you because you're now taking those into your body. So absolutely. So I think we are in agreement.
Yeah, we are in. But the other thing I'm just saying is that the same thing applies to all the vegetables, fruits, everything that we consume, because they all contain artificial fertilizers, pesticides.
You're absolutely right. But the difference is in Jain Dharma, they're seen as one sense beings. So although they're souls, they only have one sense, which is touch. Okay, so they're seen as a lower form of life, so necessary hinsa, whereas a five sense being is actually quite evolved, and killing one of those is actually much, much, much more sinful. And so there is a degree, which is why it's more acceptable, not totally acceptable, but more acceptable than the milk question.
So I agree with you, but as I see it, is that most people still consider milk to be just a traditional part of their life. They're doing all the religion things, but one thing, it's like if you're having milk, it's just like having beef. There's no difference between the two, because as soon as milk is finished, it goes on. People are aware of all these things, but people don't want to change.
The when you think about it from a logical perspective, why do we try and do ambel and upwas? And if
That's
you
how
think
it
about
should
it, the thing we're doing with ambel is basically switching off all the sensory things. It's not going to smell nice, look nice, taste nice. It's just there to nourish your food. And when you do upwas, is to force your body to give up the thing that it needs most, food, the most basic need. So by doing this, what you're doing is actually disciplining and strengthening your mind, so that even if you love chocolates, you can look at it and say, I'm not having it. So, rather than, oh, it's there, I better eat it before it melts. And that strengthening of mind, Ashwin, is where I think the issue is, that if your mind isn't strong enough, what happens is that it's very difficult to let go of these things. And if your mind is strong, you get to a point where, if you think about, again, the idea of diksha, the rule is when you put your bowl out, as long as it's okay food, in the sense that it's, fit to consume for a Jain sadhu, it doesn't matter what it is. It goes in your bowl and you eat it, right? So you go from wanting and liking and having all these tastes to taking anything somebody offers you, right? It's a big step change. And that shows you the mental strength that you get to, where it doesn't matter what it is, it's put in front of you, you'll eat it. That's it. And this is the reason I think people can't give up milk. They can't give it up because mentally they haven't reached a point where they've got strong enough just to say no. And they don't like the oat milk and almond milk and coconut milk until it gets to a point where somebody creates normal milk that tastes the same, but isn't from a cow. I think it'll carry on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mehul and Miraben.
Thank you, Ajitbhai. Does anyone else have any last minute questions before we wrap up the session?
Yeah, I had one from Sushila Ben,
Yep.
which is, why is it challenging to take diksha in our Western environment?
Well, I think in the Western environment, the thing that you have to think about is that there is no tradition this kind of renunciation. When there used to be monks and nuns here, if any of you watch Robin Hood and you see that Friar Tuck as a monk is dressed in that way, that was the tradition. They used to live in monasteries or abbeys. They He used to cultivate things. So this idea of a person walking barefoot from place to place doesn't exist. Secondly, if you look at the weather cycle, you have to be very advanced in order to, have 2 pieces of cotton clothes even through winter and so on, which doesn't happen for a few years. And the third thing is that monks today, and I say today because in the past things were a bit different, but today are totally dependent on Jain householders. Okay, so if it's lunchtime and you go for gochri, you go for food, and everybody's out at work, or you're having pizza for lunch, how does it work, right? So there's a whole question of this thing, which is why in this country you don't tend to see traditional diksha. And even in countries like India, where it's there, it's changed. I mean, it's no longer a people just walk from one place to another. People know they're coming here in 3 days' time, and things are a bit more organized and so on, because of the time that we're in. Whereas before, people would just go from place to place, and there wasn't the telecommunications to tell them, he'll be there in 2 days. Please make sure you give him a welcome. You just went. And so this is why it's changed. But what I do see is that there are people taking not alternate, but lesser vows of things. I've seen a lot of people do that, which means they carry on living as they are, but they put restrictions. I mean, we do that, for example, during Paryushan with food restrictions. People will take badas and tyags and whatever. So you see a lot of that, but you don't see the full thing.
Can I just ask, Mehool, the Samijis that are here, how do they eat them? Do they cook for themselves?
Very good question. So 2 acharyas ago, from the current one. So the current one is Acharya Mahashvaman. Before that, there was Acharya Mahapragya. Before that, there was Acharya Tulsi, very famous Acharya. He realized that a lot of the Rajasthani Terapanthis, Marwadi people from Rajasthan, were moving into other countries and they needed support. And so he created a new sect called the Samnis. So Saman and Samani, right? And they take the same vows as the others with 2 or 3 differences. One is that they can stay in one place. So they stay in the same place. The second is that they can eat food specially prepared for them. So they don't go out begging for food. People will bring food to them, which they can do. And the third is that they can travel, which monks can't. So they can get on a plane and get here. And the reason for that, and so what he did was use this as a way to start not just a religious, but a social movement. So I know that Samniji, who was here during COVID, spent a lot of time counseling people, because when people are living in the same house together, there was all sorts of issues, if I'm honest, of violence, of all sorts of things. And she spent a lot of time counseling them. My own father passed away during COVID, and she was here so many days sitting, with prayers for him and giving him, teachings and lectures about, how to progress smoothly, and did an absolutely wonderful job. So they become almost social workers, religious people, and people who do things. So he started that, and it's been carried on. Now, what has started to happen, which is also, I think, really interesting, is that they've set up a university at Ladnoon in Rajasthan, so that anybody who joins the movement first has to get a master's degree or a PhD. So you have to know what you're getting into. And as a result, many of them who've come here with that learning have, so last somebody who was here got a PhD from SOAS and was teaching there and is now a professor at Florida University. So this is what they tend to do, but they still live within those 3, within those restrictions.
That's great, thank you. That helped to answer a lot of questions in my head. Anyway, I met a Samiji last April, actually, in at SOAS, and
Pratibha Pragya, probably.
Yeah. And it was just her knowledge and everything was just amazing. So
And she is yeah, so she is basically now at Florida teaching there. But you're right. I mean, she's done a PhD here at SOAS and learned English very well, and yeah, so it's a huge benefit. So,
Brilliant. Thanks, Mehool Bhai. I think it's time to wrap up. So
again, thank you so much.
thank you.
Really enjoyed it, and I
yeah.
hope everybody else did.
I'm sure we'll receive a lot of positive feedback as well, and Shandip Bhai will as well. So thank you so much for stepping in this week, and we're looking forward to next week's lecture already. But please, for anyone who does have any questions, if you want to think of them, send them in beforehand, or just ask them on next Tuesday's lesson, please feel free to do so. But thank you, Mehool Bhai, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best.